The Web Forms API enables you to deliver a Web Forms experience to your users from a custom integration. Before you make Web Forms API calls, you first need to create a web form configuration in your account using the Docusign application. A configuration is a set of properties that define the content and behavior of a web form. When creating a web form instance for users to fill out, the API call specifies the web form configuration from which to create the instance. When you create an instance with an API call, you can pass data to pre-fill fields, which can streamline the completion process for your users. You can also choose between two different delivery methods. One option is to request that Docusign send an email with a link that the user follows to open and complete the form. Another alternative is to create a form instance that you can embed in a custom integration. To get a list of all the web forms in your account, you make a GET request to the Forms endpoint of the Web Forms API. The request returns an array of objects, and each object contains details on one web form configuration, including whether the configuration is published or a draft, and metadata about the creation and modification history of the configuration. The Forms endpoint supports filters that enable you to search for forms by their names or other criteria. You can also specify a sort order for multiple results. When you identify a form to use, you call the Forms endpoint again, including the form ID value in the URL and specifying a state query parameter to indicate whether the requested configuration is active or a draft. The response includes a list of form fields and their data types. To create an instance of a form, you make a POST request to the instance's endpoint for that form ID. To pre-fill field values, you pass a form values property in the request body that specifies each field name and the value to pre-fill. If your request body includes the send option property with a value of now, the request triggers an email to all recipients assigned to the first step of the routing order. Your request must also specify required values for each role in the envelope associated with the web form. If your form values property does not include all the required role data, you can include the recipient's property to specify these values. The email sent as a result of this API call contains a link to the envelope with the web form embedded in the envelope flow. If your request omits the send option property, the response instead includes a form URL and an instance token. You can use the Docusign JS SDK to render the form within your integration, or your integration can manually combine the returned values to embed the form instance in your application and present it to the current user. Let's take a look at how you implement these actions with API requests. First, you need to authenticate to Docusign and get an access token. Calling the Forms endpoint of the Web Forms API with no form ID or parameters returns a list of all available web forms in your account. The response contains an array of objects, and each object contains the details for a single web form. Adding one or more parameters to the form's URL returns a filtered and sorted list of forms. For example, this request filters for web forms with a status of published. It specifies a sort on the created date field in descending order. The response array includes a list of web forms meeting the criteria specified in the request. To get configuration details for just one web form, you add the form ID to the request URL, and you specify the form state you're requesting data on with the state query parameter. The response is a single object containing configuration details on just the specified web form. To create a form instance, you call the instance's endpoint, passing the form ID in the URL. To generate an email to each recipient containing a link to the envelope the configuration is based on, include send option with a value of now in the request body. The response confirms a status of initiated and provides metadata about the form instance. If you instead want to create a form instance to embed in an integration, you use the same endpoint but exclude the send option property from the request body. In this case, the response includes status and metadata values, as well as the form URL and instance token values required to embed the form.